welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Phantom. Returning the following evening in good time to witness the performance, I was truly staggered by the sights which met my eyes. Such ingenuity and baffling sleight of hand as virtually defied belief. I was dizzied by the assault on my visual senses, and my brain reeled as all my concepts of gravity and time were turned upside down and inside out in a merciless succession. All the laws which govern the universe were challenged within that tent. Some of the illusions were positively supernatural. And long before the show's ending, I was quietly convinced that I stood in the presence of a genie, created from fire more than 2,000 years before Adam. I noted uneasily that he was left-handed. Every Muslim knows the devil is left-handed. It is for this reason that we always care to spit to the left. My fingers felt instinctively for the amulets that hung around my neck. An outstretched hand made of silver and dry-eyed of a sheep, killed at Mecca on the great day of sacrifice. Both were powerful protective agencies, and I never felt more in need of their protection. I take care not to meet his gaze directly, for I already feared his evil eye. The crowd in the tent became hysterical when the performance ended, surging forward, showering the floor with coins, clattering from all marbles like greedy, wide-eyed children. But he turned away, telling them with a note of weariness in his voice they had seen all he had was prepared to show today. They refused to go, closing in around him like a pack of hungry animals. They began to demand, with mounting frenzy, that he should take off his mask and sing for them. "Show us your face," they shouted. "Show us your face, Erik, and let us hear the devil sing." His thin hand clenched convulsively in fits of rage, and I felt a moment of stark fear that he would refuse. For if he did, I would expect to be trampled in the ugly mob violence that would surely follow. Then, without warning, his hand sprang open and stripped the masks away. The silence that descended was awesome. It was as though everyone in the tent had ceased to breathe. I was standing very close to him, close enough to feel myself sway a little with shock that the horrific skull was revealed from my bulging eyes. The fur trader from Samarkand had never spoken of this. Perhaps he had been afraid that it would be a discredit a tale already larger than life, for certainly no one would have not seen had believed in such living horror. I could not take my eyes from him. I stood and stared like a mannerless peasant, aghast by an unparalleled inhuman ugliness that was made somehow all the more terrible by the hatred that looked out of his sunken eyes and the pain that twisted his grotesquely deformed lips. In that tense moment before I began to sing, I sensed this deep and overwhelming loathing of the crowd. And then I forgot everything as the real magic was revealed to me for the first time. Nothing I had seen till now could compare with the wonderful alchemy that turned sound into liquid gold within my ears and washed me out of the dimly lit tent on a swift moving tide of ecstasy. For he sang of love, and with every nuisance of his voice I saw Rukita reach across to the endless void which separated us. Every word and every note brought us closer, so close I found myself holding out my arms to her embrace. Then the silence fell once more, and the vision was gone. My throat closed, and I wept, as so many were weeping all around me. When the song ended, the crowd drifted from its tent in a soundless wonder. There could not have been a single person who was not severely shaken and deep in private thought. He had conjured every remembered sadness from our racial memories and distilled to a peak of unbearable beauty. No human mind could have tolerated more pain that evening. He had been revenged upon us all. When the tent was empty, I watched him replace the mask mechanically with hands and trembled in emotion, and I wondered what terrible anguish of the past enabled him to express such an exquisite refinement of grief. A remarkable physical change came over him as his hideous face was out of sight. His shoulders straightened, and his entire frame was once more exuded the mysterious strength and power that I had sensed last night. A moment before he had seemed like an old man. Now he might have been shed 30 years in as many seconds, and I was once more aware that he was the prime of manhood, probably a few years younger than myself. "You have come for your answer, I suppose," he said grimly, when I continued to linger pointed by the velvet-covered table. "You will be greatly honored in Persia," I reminded him. "Anything you desire will be yours." "No one in the world can give me what I desire," he said shortly. "Not even the Shah of Persia." "But you will come with me?" He raised his shoulders in an elegant, scornful shrug. "Apparently," he said, and turned away to relight the charcoal in the samovar. The following day coincided with the great end of the fair, and the mass exodus from Nijni Novgorod began in interest. There was no immediate passages to be had on the paddled steamers, which were now full of rich merchants, began heading for home, and the rest I could arrange was a place for our party aboard a barge grossly overcrowded with people, chests of tea, and bales of cotton. We traveled as far as Kazan by river very early in the morning. I chanced upon him unloading his horses with the air of quiet determination. "What are you doing?" I demanded in alarm. "There's no time to go to shore." "I intend to travel no farther like that crate of tea," he told me calmly. "You, of course, may do exactly as you please." "You mean you can't seriously mean to travel to the shore of Caspian by land?" I gasped. He glanced at me carelessly across the horse's mane. "Perhaps I do not choose to continue at all. I don't care to be confined in such disagreeable proximity to the human race." Sensing defeat, I did my best to be conciliatory. "I admit the journey has not been comfortable." "Comfort has nothing to do with it," he muttered. "I have every hope of transferring to a steamer at Samaria, at which we shall reach the Caspian in a matter of days." "I am not interested in speed," he retired sharply, "only in privacy. If I continue this journey at all, it will be by land." I lost my temper. "That's ridiculous," I flared. "Such a journey would take us weeks." Weeks! How am I to explain this unpardonable delay to the Shah? He spread his hands in an arrogant gesture of indifference. "Perhaps you would prefer to explain your failure instead. Goodbye, Daroga. Enjoy the remainder of your voyage aboard this floating packing case." As he turned and began to lean his horses ashore, I grabbed his sleeve. "Wait!" I knew that if I permitted him to disappear into the chasm, I should now never succeed in tracking him down a second time. "Give me the time to arrange the unloading of my own belongings, and we shall proceed as you wish." "Exactly as you wish, but I am warning you now that the imperial displeasure is not a thing to be lightly risked. The King of Kings does not like to be kept waiting." "The King of Kings must learn patience," said Erik coldly, "like everyone else." That was the first occasion that I bowed to his capricious whims, the first of many had I known it. Before we left Kazan, he insisted on visiting the mausoleum, which stood roughly a mile outside of town. Since now I abandoned all hope of swift return to Persia, and because I did not trust him out of my sight for 2 minutes, I was forced to accompany him through the dark, ill-smelling catacombs to admire the bones of those who had died 3 centuries ago at the siege of Kazan. Human remains made me nervous, and I was horrified when we began to assemble the relics of an entire skeleton, placing it patiently, bone by bone, into a bag. "What do you want to do with that?" I demanded uneasily. "You're surely not going to take it with you?" "But of course," he replied calmly. "I have rarely seen such a perfect preserved specimen. Look, it's possible to see where the knife chipped on the rib bone on penetration." "How can you tell it was a knife?" "I have dissected sufficient corpses who have died of knife wounds to know that the signs are unmistakable." "Dissected?" I stared at him aghast. "You have performed dissections?" "From time to time. It is the only way to reach any true understanding of the human body. I have an academic interest in the physiology of the Homo sapiens." a certain curiosity, you understand. The way he spoke of the human race was very unsettling. It was as though he did not include himself within the species at all. A shiver passed through my body. I was deeply relieved when we were in the sunlight again. I asked him no more questions. I did not know what kind of man collected skeletons from tomb and dissected dead bodies to satisfy an academic interest. Several times before he left Kazan, he devastated me with fresh evidence of utter immorality. Walking with him through the streets of this little Moscow one night, I was horrified to observe that each time we passed a wealthy Tartar merchant, a leather purse would appear briefly in Eric's hand on its way to some hidden respiratory in his cloak. It seemed to me that the purses were leaping into his fingers by magic alone. For I watched him closely, I was never able to register the moment when his hand dipped effortlessly into a capacious pocket. Later, I began to understand that the only reason I had seen anything at all was because he wished me to see. He appeared to enjoy shocking me, and I am forced to admit that though his company was certainly highly disconcerting, it was never for one single moment dull. I was like a well-behaved child playing truant from school in a company of a perfect rogue. When he offered to teach me the trick, I actually hesitated for a moment, weighing the consequences of being caught before refusing with a show of righteous indignation. But reality descended upon me once we left behind the Tartared splendor of Kazan. Before our interminable trek through the primal forest that lined the banks of the Volga, I suffered many uneasy moments. We were a small party, completely vulnerable to the bands of robbers who roamed the waterways in search of the foolhardy and unwary travelers. Darius slept with a loaded pistol beside his pallet and persuaded we to do the same. But Erik seemed utterly indifferent to the danger, often disappearing by himself into the thick of the forest without warning or explanation, and remaining absent from the camp for several nights. On closer acquaintance, I found him moody and changeable. It was never possible to predict his humor or anticipate the moment when good temper would abruptly give way to the bad. He was subject to fits of black melancholy, and when such a mood came upon him, he was withdrawn to his tent and refused to move any further, neither eating nor speaking for days at a time. Anyone who disturbed him at such a moment did so with a considerable risk to life and limb, for as far as we quickly learned, he had a violent and ungovernable temper. And then again, just as unpredictably, he would become amusing and sociable once more, showing off his astonishing skills as a magician, musician, and ventriloquist, stunning us all with each fresh evidence of his inexhaustible ingenuity. In such a mood, he was occasionally prepared to linger by the campfire and humor my curiosity with tales of exotic travel. He seemed to have lived for a long time in most of the countries that cover Europe and Asia, and in India he spent a brief sojourn among the mystics in the tent of the Karat Kitten that lies southern western Himalayas. He was a born storyteller. Extraordinary legends fell from his lips with a rhythmic and compelling intensity that held the listener spellbound. I learned more of the secrets of the world during those weeks of travel than I could ever have done the whole lifetime of study. But of his personal history, I gained very little insight. He never spoke of the life that must have once been his in the days before he began to roam the earth, driven by the insatiable lust for knowledge. He hid his past just as he hid his face, and even the most iniquitous attempt to pry was met with hostility. We had traveled in this manner for several weeks when the weather abruptly turned against us. For days in succession, heavy clouds rolled in over the Volga and rained sluiced down from the iron-gray sky in a relentless sheet that turned the ground beneath our horses' hooves in an impassable quagmire. We were soaked to the skin as we rode, and it was impossible to dry our clothes at night around the inadequate braziers of our tents. The steamy tropical heat of the Mazardan seemed far away, and this unreasonably cold and cursed wet spell I took to a cold that left me coughing like an old man. By the time we reached the Kamachin, where the storms closed in and made farther travel out of question. I was burning up with fever. Darius covered me with the driest blanket he could find, and I spent a wretched night listening to the rain drumming incessantly on the stretched feet of the tent. By morning, pain was knifing through my chest with every breath I took. I was still struggling to draw in air in my lungs when Erik strode unexpectedly to my tent and bent over my pallet. Your servant told me you were ill. His eyes examined me with shrewd concern. How long have you been in pain on breathing? A few hours, I said sullenly. This filthy climate and your stubbornness are entirely to blame for it. He put a cold hand on my forehead and I gasped at his chilling touch. It was not a natural coldness, such as I could safely attribute to the weather, but rather the stone-cold, bloodless chill we associated with death. A coldness that would remain unchanged even in the fierce heat of Mazaderdin. I twisted my head from a touch that reminded me so comfortably of mortality. Inflammation of the lungs, I heard him mutter. I should prepare an infusion that will help. So you're a doctor too, are you? I said rudely. Is there no end to your accomplishments? He rose and looked down at me with extraordinarily calm. I have certain skills that you may have cause to be glad of. But of course, if you prefer to rely on the remedies of your idiot servant, that is certainly your privilege. He walked out of my tent without a backward glance, and I lay glaring at the leather walls with feverish irritation. Why should I trust him? He was as likely to have poisoned me as anything else, particularly after the manner in which I insulted him. I did not feel inclined to submit to dubious gypsy cures. Inflammation of the lungs. What could he know of it? I remember very little of the following days. I plunged into a realm of fevered nightmares through which I was dimly aware of Darius tending me in a strange, dark, faceless shape that occasionally bent over my pallet to utter some scathing challenge. Try, damn you. I can do nothing if you're just going to give up. Each time I heard that voice, I had a vague impulse to struggle up and hit its owner, and for the little time the darkness would recede from me. But I was growing very weary, and all I wanted to do was to slide effortlessly down to the welcoming oblivion. Down, 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 into the peace where Rokita waited patiently for me. And then there was the music. Music soft and soothing as a waterfall. Music that coaxed my unwilling soul back up to the light with its sweet, unspoken promise. Trust me, follow me, let me show you the way to her side. I believed in the music. I followed it without question. And when I woke up in the grayness of my tent, and with only Darius beside me, I wept at the cruelty of its fiendish deception. He said you would wake weeping if you woke at all, master, said Darius quietly. He said I was to take no notice and give you this. Darius lifted me from the pallet and tricked a little foul-smelling syrup down my throat. When he laid me down again, I saw the crayon lying beside my bed. And then I just knew how close to paradise I had been. If my extremity of illness had aroused Eric's concerns, certainly my convalescence appeared to bore him utterly, for he did not come near me until I was back on my feet. And when I made some tentative reference to gratitude, he only laughed at me rather scornfully and told me that my death would have proved most inconvenient to him at this point in the proceedings. He stayed with me on the occasion until quite late in the evening, taking advantage of my weakened state to win a hefty sum of money for me in a successive game of chess. But at length, when he grew bored with my uninspired play, he got up, put the chessboard away, and tossed his winnings on my pillow. What is this? I demanded, unsurprised. He shrugged. You're tired. It wasn't a fair contest. But beware. Tomorrow we shall treble the stakes, and believe me, I shall show you no quarter. He turned and rode out of the tent without another word, and in his wake the wind blew the flaps apart. As I struggled over to tie them shut, I glanced and saw it happen. A man in a cowl dress came out from the undergrowth with a knife. Before I could utter a word of warning, Erik had rounded like a wildcat at his assailant. A thin little lasso strapped through the air, neatly garroting the intruder with one swift, savage jerk, and the man fell dead in the churning mud before I almost had a chance to blink. I was dumbstruck by the lightning reflex, an authentic, merciless response which betrayed all the instincts of a jungle predator to whom killing is as natural and commonplace as breathing. He had killed before, many times. That simple fact could be no question of doubt. As I stood in the mouth of my tent, gaping in open-mouthed horror, Erik bent down to release the lasso with a careless flick of his finger and place it some unseen respiratory of his